This is Sky News at 4, the top stories. Calls for President Trump to denounce the far-right rally in which 3 people died, as the local governor says fascists are not welcome in America.
There is no place for you here in Charlottesville. There is no place for you in Virginia. And there is no place for you in the United States of America.
And in his first interview since being sacked, Donald Trump's former communications director attacks the president for not calling the violence terrorism. I'm clean. Sir Mo Farah launches a tearful attack on the media over doping allegations.
You can write what you like, but at the same time, I'm a clean athlete, and as long as I understand I sleep well at night.
Brexit brotherhood for now, as 2 cabinet ministers from opposing sides present a united front. The fight for Raqqa. Sky News speaks to the British man who left his life back home to fight Islamic State in Syria.
And in the sport, it's the first Super Sunday of the new Premier League season. Manchester United have just kicked off against West Ham. And
a very good afternoon to you. Now, in the last few minutes, the White House has said that President Trump's statement about the violence at a far-right rally in Virginia, in which he condemned the behaviour of many sides, included white supremacists, KKK, neo-Nazi and all extremist groups. The clarification came after President Trump was criticised for not denouncing the far-right protesters at yesterday's march. The rally in Charlottesville descended into violence, resulting in the deaths of 3 people. A 32-year-old woman who died after a car was driven into anti-fascist protesters, and 2 police officers who were killed when their helicopter crashed. From Charlottesville, our correspondent James Matthews reports, and a warning that this report does contain moments before a woman is hit by a car.
This was the street where a car had been driven at speed into a crowd.
Shame on you!
Well, meanwhile, sacked White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci has been interviewed for the first time since he left the White House. Speaking on This Week on ABC News, he said the president should have condemned white supremacists over violence in Charlottesville last night.
I think he needed to be much harsher as it related to the white supremacists and the nature of that.
Well, let's go live to Washington now, and Sky's US correspondent Cordelia Lynch. And Cordelia, a lot of criticism here of Donald Trump, but in the last few minutes, a White House spokesperson has fought back.
Yes, I think whichever way you look at it, the condemnation and criticism of Donald Trump was swift from within his own party, from the White House later this afternoon. OK,
Cordelia, thank you. Sir Mo Farah has used a news conference after his silver medal win at the World Championships to launch an emotional attack on the media. The athlete, who's retiring from championship track events, accused the press of trying to destroy him over drug allegations.
Sometimes I find it bizarre how certain people write certain things and show them what's right. That's all that counts.
Now, after weeks of public spats, 2 of the Cabinet's leading members have attempted to show a united front. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, and the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, have written a joint article in the Sunday Telegraph. In that article, they've agreed that Britain needs a transition period to soften the UK's exit from the European Union. Well, they have said that businesses need to have confidence that they will not be a cliff edge when we leave the European Union in just over 20 months' time. That is why we believe a time-limited interim period will be important to further our national interest and give businesses a greater certainty. But it cannot be indefinite. It cannot be a backdoor to staying inside the EU. And they go on to say, we are both clear that during this period, the EU and the UK will be outside the single market and outside the customs union, and will be a third country, not party to EU treaties. Well, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has reacted to the article by tweeting, "It is the right way forward, creating certainty and giving a great new European relationship. Get job done and on with global Britain." Well, for more on this, we're joined now by South London, by the Conservative MP Chris Philp. A very good afternoon to you. First off, has Philip Hammond pandered to the hard Brexiteers in the Cabinet by agreeing to leave the customs union and the single market?
No, I don't think he has. And I think actually the Chancellor and the Cabinet for some time have been saying that leaving the European Union does mean leaving the customs union and leaving the single market. There's nothing new there, because if we were to stay in either of those two things, we would have to continue accepting the sovereignty of the European Court of Justice. We'd have to continue with unlimited free movement and with accepting rules made in Brussels. So once you've decided to leave, and the country did decide to leave on June the 23rd last year, it does make sense to leave those two things, the customs union and the single market. And I think the Chancellor has agreed with that position for quite some considerable period of time. But it's good to see Liam Fox and Philip Hammond completely united in their article in today's Telegraph. So no one can claim there is as much as a cigarette paper between those leading members of the Cabinet.
Well, it might come across like that, but is it genuine, or is it all just a front?
Well, I think it is genuine. I mean, this has obviously been debated for a number of months now. We've thought about it, in Parliament and debated it in Parliament very carefully. And I think the position I just mentioned a moment ago is a self-evidently reasonable one. Now, of course, what we really want to do is make sure that businesses don't get unduly affected by any sort of nasty surprises. So I think a transition period, and I think we're talking about somewhere between 1 and 3 years, makes enormous sense. But of course, what we really need to do in the negotiations coming up is agree a really good free trade deal that lets British companies keep trading with European ones and vice versa. Now, I think it's very disappointing that the European Commission have historically been refusing to discuss that, and I hope come October they'll start behaving more reasonably. And the real tension, the real division, isn't on this side of the English Channel, it's on the other side, because people like Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier have been trying to make this a deliberately difficult process in order to discourage other countries from leaving. But people like Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, I think want to do a good free trade deal because it serves the economic interests of Germany. And when I met the Bavarian finance minister 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was really keen to do a good free trade deal. Not surprising, because the UK is Germany's biggest export market for German manufactured cars. So I hope that Angela Merkel and President Macron and others will tell Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier to stop messing around and get on with that free trade deal, which is in their interests as much as it is in ours.
We spoke to Ben Bradshaw a short while ago. He was very critical of this transition and coming out of the single market and the customs union. In fact, he said that it will drive our economy over a cliff edge.
Well, I think that's nonsense. I mean, I voted Remain, by the way, last year, but I accept the result. Unfortunately, Ben Bradshaw and, people like Tony Blair and David Miliband, unfortunately, don't accept the result of the referendum. If you do accept the result of a democratic vote, as I do, then you have to accept that to do it properly, you need to leave the customs union and single market. I don't agree, by the way, that leaving those things will be an economic catastrophe, because I think, well, for a start, you've seen in the year following the vote, record numbers of jobs being created. You see plenty of countries prospering outside the European Union. Our trade, for example, with America has grown far more than our trade with the European Union has over the last 5 or 10 years. So I think we can prosper. Of course, a free trade deal will help us do that. And, I think once Angela Merkel is through her national election in about a month or so's time, she will tell Juncker and Barnier to stop messing around and agree a sensible deal, which is what we want to do.
OK, Conservative MP Chris Philp, thanks very much for your time. You're watching Sky News. Coming up in the sport, Tottenham start their Premier League. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. Time now for a roundup of all the day's sport.
This programme is brought to you by Vitality Health and Life Insurance.
Lifting a leg. My speciality. Oh, sorry.
Getting active brings its own rewards.
Hello again. Reaction to Tottenham's 2-0 win over Newcastle in just a moment, but feel sorry for the ball boy. He's got to go and collect that, don't you? More updates and reaction to those Premier League games on Sky Sports News. We're back later on.
And that's the end of the show. I'm off for a biscuit. Anyone fancy?
Now, next week, the government will announce its plans for the Irish border after Brexit, which may include a proposal to allow Irish citizens to move freely in and out of the UK without border checks. It comes as Gerry Kelly, a senior Sinn Féin MLA, has called on all nationalist parties on the island to work together to deliver a united Ireland. Well, joining me now from our Westminster studio is Jonathan Moore, an Irish politics expert. A very good afternoon to you. First of all, your reaction to these reports of this Schengen-style arrangement?
They're very interesting. I mean, there's great pressure coming from Dublin to find a solution to this problem. The Dublin government is absolutely petrified about what Brexit might do, not only to the Irish economy. Ireland is a very successful economy, the fastest growing economy in the EU. It's very dependent on links with the United Kingdom, and they're worried about that. And secondly, they're very, very concerned that the peace process will be affected by this. So what I think we're going to get is a number of initiatives to try and soften the blow. Everybody is in agreement that a hard Brexit is totally unrealistic in terms of the very special relationship between Britain and Ireland. So one very obvious way is the free movement of people, which would be a start.
And there was a suggestion of relocating the border into the Irish Sea, but it seems, according to these reports, that that's now gone out the window.
Yeah, that was an idea from the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach. That seems to have been kicked into touch. Everybody is trying to make a case to say whatever happens in Brexit, the relationship between Britain and Ireland is a special one. It's a different one and has always been a different one. And therefore, we can't simply allow it to be treated as just another relationship.
And it was just last week that the Irish Prime Minister spoke out pretty strongly, criticising Westminster for not acting sooner. Do you think that this is down to the timing of this and that's why they've come out now?
I think it's partly a result of that. I think the Irish government despairs at what they regard as the mess that the British government has got into over Brexit. We've got a new Prime Minister in Dublin. He's a more forceful character than his predecessor, and his language was actually very, very strong. So it may have affected the timing of this decision today. Ireland is certainly hoping that it will result in a number of initiatives which will soften Brexit in terms of Anglo-Irish relations.
And your reaction to Jerry Kelly's comments today, saying that all nationalist parties need to work together?
I mean, there's nothing surprising about this at all. Jerry Kelly has been making speeches like that for many years. Sinn Féin are very, very keen that all nationalist parties in Ireland, both north and south of the border, in a sense, begin pushing the question of a united Ireland, which to some extent has been put in the long grass. Many Sinn Féin people I've spoken to said there isn't enough emphasis on it. All the Constitutional Nationalist Party say that they are in favour of it, and what Jerry Kelly is saying, it's not enough to simply say we're in favour. We've got to actively campaign for it. Whether it actually makes very much difference to what happens, I'm dubious. As much as anything, it's simply to say a united Ireland is what we want in the long term, and Kelly is hoping that there'll be some language from the other parties to support that.
Indeed, indeed. Many concerned about the implications on the Good Friday Agreement. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
But it's time now for a look at the weather.
As a warm day ends in Africa, delicious aromas fill a steamy evening in Asia.
After a pleasant weekend, it's back to more changeable weather, I'm afraid, next week. Most places on Monday it will be cloudy and breezy with outbreaks of rain, although the southeast will remain dry and bright. Ahead of that, it'll be a mostly fine and dry end to Sunday afternoon. However, thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain will push into western parts of Ireland. Cloud and rain will spread across the rest of Ireland into Northern Ireland this evening before reaching western parts of Scotland, England and Wales overnight. Elsewhere, it will be largely dry with some clear sunny spells.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This is Sky News coming up. Welcome back. The top stories here on Sky News. The White House says that President Trump condemns white supremacists and all extremist groups after he was criticised for his response to violence at a far-right rally in which 3 people died. Sir Mo Farah has used a news conference after his silver medal win at the World Championships to launch an emotional attack on the media. And after weeks of public spats, 2 of the Cabinet's leading members, Philip Hammond and Liam Fox, have attempted to show a united front on Brexit. Well, now it's time for our weekly technology show, Swipe. Here's Gemma.
The latest technology to your home. The Swipe Report on Sky News is sponsored by Currys PC World and Philips Hue.
Welcome to Swipe from the Gfinity Esports Arena in London. Here's what we've got for you on this week's programme. Well, that's it for this week, but don't forget to join us again for more Swipe next week. And why not follow us on Twitter at Sky News Swipe. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bringing the latest technology to your home. The Swipe Report on Sky News is sponsored by Currys PC World and Philips Hue.
Learner drivers will soon be allowed to have lessons on motorways in dual-control cars. The new rules, which come into effect next year, aim to give new drivers more preparation behind the wheel. Transport Secretary Chris Grayling says it's an important step towards making sure young people are experienced enough when they get on the road. But some have questioned the safety of the change. The fight to take back Raqqa in Syria from Islamic State is continuing with help from British volunteers. Sky News has spoken to one man who left his job in the UK to do just that. Jack Holmes has been describing the dangers he's faced, including from other sniper fire, suicide bombers and rockets.
We have been in combat with ISIS from 50 metres to 500 metres. They're everywhere on the front. The city's very tightly packed together, all the buildings, so they can sneak around a lot and you don't see them. The first day we went out, they sent a suicide truck to our position. Luckily it didn't blow up.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up in the sport, we'll get the latest.
Lucky me.
Welcome back. Now it's been a busy day of action in the Premier League, and Jane in the Sky Sports News Centre has an update for us.
Hello again. Yes, reaction to Tottenham's 2-0 win over Newcastle in just a moment. But first to Old Trafford, where Manchester United are playing their first game of the new season. They're up against Sky Crickets. They had to go next door and ask for their ball back. More reactions and updates to those Premier League games on Sky Sports News. We're back a little later on.
Thanks very much for that update there, Jane. Now it is a glorious day out there. Summer's back. Is it set to stay? Let's take a look at the weather.
Australia welcomes a bright day as clouds drift through European skies.
After a pleasant weekend, it's back to more changeable weather, I'm afraid, next week. More places on Monday will be cloudy and breezy with outbreaks of rain, although the southeast will remain dry and bright. Ahead of that, it'll be a mostly fine and dry end to Sunday afternoon. However, thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain will push into western parts of Ireland. Cloud and rain will spread across the rest of Ireland into Northern Ireland this evening before reaching western parts of Scotland, England and Wales overnight. Elsewhere, it will be largely dry with clear spells and pretty bright in the warm and southeast.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, Donald Trump does condemn extremists. The White House defends the president over his response to the violence in Virginia. More after the break.